Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue. And man, we have had some big news days on the show before, but I'm not sure we've had one as impactful as what has happened in the last 5 or 6 hours, Tom.
No, it came out as pretty quick and it came out as hard, and I've got to say I'm reeling.
Yeah, let's get right into, the biggest news of the week and really quite literally breaking news. Just today on Wednesday, as we're recording this, we've seen more and more developments come out about this news story all day today. And that is that in response to the COVID pandemic, the WWE released a statement about noon, 12 o'clock this afternoon, announcing measures the company would be taking, which included reducing pay for executives, decreasing operating expenses, furloughing employees, halting the move to a new corporate headquarters, and probably most noteworthy for fans, cutting talent. As of this recording, as we're sitting here at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we've already seen the confirmation from the WWE of the releases of these superstars: Kurt Angle, Rusev, Drake Maverick, Zack Ryder, Kurt Hawkins, Karl Anderson, Luke Gallows, Heath Slater, Eric Young, Rowan, Sarah Logan, No Way Jose, referee Mike Chioda, Mike and Maria Kanellis, EC3, Aiden English, Leo Rush, Primo, and Epico.
Jesus, that is a long list.
Yeah, and some of the names on that list, are, Kurt Angle, Rusev, guys like that really stick out as big name talent, not usually the type of people you would see when, cutting time comes around. We've also had some other names rumored, but haven't been confirmed by the company. Now, there are some people on Twitter that have personally confirmed their releases on social media. A couple of NXT talent have gone on social media and at least announced on their personal accounts that they have been released. We've also heard that producers have been furloughed. They have not been released, but they have been furloughed, and those producers include names like Hurricane Helms and Fit Finley. Tom, I'll start by just giving you the floor here. What are your thoughts on today's pretty shocking announcements?
Well, just to give an overview, I came home from work because I am back in the office as a key worker. So I came home, sat down, and then started getting the messages. So I opened up my laptop, put on Twitter, and from that moment, it's essentially been going from being upset to being more and more upset. And then you see stuff like Drake Maverick's video, and that really hits you hard. I've been in a lot of tiny little arenas with Drake, previously known as Rockstar Spud, and seen what he's done and the way he entertains and the 24/7 business, which is it's really hitting people hard, and it really upsets me the amount of people I've seen on Twitter making jokes. Most often than not, the same jokes, and these are people who, and I can understand where the company's coming from, because business-wise, I get what they're saying. They need to cut costs, even though I would definitely ask questions about how much they needed to cut costs. But it is never a good thing when anyone is losing their job, especially when they had no control. There is nothing anyone could have done here. I'm hit pretty hard by it.
Yeah, like I said, this doesn't feel like your normal round of cuts. You never want to see anybody lose their job, but usually around WrestleMania time in the past, we've seen that there have been some releases of superstars, but this really does feel different. You can see, you mentioned Drake Maverick. No Way Jose is another guy that I've seen on social media that have posted videos and reactions, and you can tell from their posts that they were not expecting this. They were not expecting the release. No Way Jose mentioned in his video that if he knew that this past Monday night's Raw was going to be his last Raw, that maybe he would have taken things in a little bit more than he did. So you could tell that this was something that for a lot of them came out of left field and wasn't something they were expecting, especially considering the situation that we're in with the coronavirus pandemic. What have you heard has been the locker room reaction as a whole to these moves made by the WWE today?
Well, first I'll say that it came out of nowhere, and almost immediately after the talent were informed that there would be cuts, and all staff were told, the producers, the writers were told that there would be cuts, phone calls were immediately starting to be made. The first 5 people announced by the WWE, they had been contacted immediately afterwards. They had no warning. The second that everyone was informed cuts were going to be happening, I started getting messages basically saying, this is not on, this is wrong. The locker room is furious, and it goes from top to bottom. Nobody is in any way accepting of this, but you've got your usual locker room leaders who are basically trying to gee up the crowd and saying, look, we've got to keep going, but everyone's affected. Management, staff, we're talking people like Triple H and Paul Heyman at this point are trying to get people back into the mood necessary for NXT, which is happening tonight after this is recorded. And you could see from No Way Jose, from Drake Maverick in particular, they're still going to be competing. They're actually still going to be competing. So there is massive disappointment, massive anger, and just there is still an underlying worry anyone could be next.
Now, what makes this somewhat curious to me is that, just yesterday, or really even before that, I guess on Sunday or Monday, we saw the stories that, the WWE had been deemed by the state of Florida as essential. That at first they were told that they were probably going to have to shut down, and then some conversations were had, and then they were deemed essential by the Florida government so that they could continue their tapings in the Performance Center. We then see that reportedly there was an $18.5 million donation made from the WWE and Linda McMahon to the state of Florida. Now today the WWE says we need to cut costs and we need to essentially save money because of the current situation of the world that we live in. Are there some dots here that we can maybe speculate to try to connect between all of these things kind of happening at once, between the Performance Center being allowed to stay open and the donation to the state of Florida, and now these cuts being made to the roster?
Well, it's very possible this is going to end up in some sort of legal proceedings based on things that have been coming out. So I want to be very careful what we say here. First and foremost, the $18.5 million donation to the Florida government and Ron DeSantis was not made by the WWE. It was made by, they're referring to it as a super PAC. Essentially, Linda McMahon was brought into Donald Trump's government to work with small business and enhance things there, and it is that group of government that has made that donation. So we would have to look beyond that and look who else is in that super PAC before we start answering questions. But I am fully aware that the McMahon family have been making, let's say, a charm offensive to Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, for a couple of weeks now. They have been making every effort to convince the government of Florida that they need to stay open. Clearly, they have done so successfully. And then, right after they've been deemed essential and can continue making live shows, this happens immediately. There must be some information that they have about what's happening in the future. Because if they didn't, why would they be doing this? Or it may be, there's also, of course, the fact that Vince McMahon is part of the task force now that will help decide how bad the economic impact has to get on America before it reopens everything. So the government, the presidency of Donald Trump, has been very, very good to the McMahon family. I don't know how connected it was to this, but we have to ask questions.
Why did the WWE feel the need to make these releases now? Was it actually necessary because of the situation and to make these cuts as far as a money-making or money-saving endeavor? Or do you feel like the COVID pandemic is being used as a cop-out here for making these mass releases?
It really depends on how long-term they're thinking. When it comes to COVID, it obviously means that anyone released cannot find another job. They cannot drive up to Georgia where the AEW were recording their shows recently, go in there and say, look, I need work, because they can't leave their homes. They are literally on a stay-at-home order in Florida. They can't do anything about it unless they are deemed as essential. Now, they don't have a job with a wrestling company anymore, so they're not considered essential. They would have to be hired by another wrestling company and brought in. Well, if they're hired by AEW, then there's weeks upon weeks of shows that have already been filmed. Same everywhere. So it's a very difficult situation for them. They've been released in a situation where they can't do anything. Long term, it may be that they want to bring some of these people back and just cut the costs that they have now. But leaving them out in the wilderness, not a good choice. And I have to say, the idea that they are putting forward, that they are doing this to cut costs and save money, they did announce that they were looking to save $4 million per month. That is not only a very small amount of their actual revenue, but when you look at the stars that have been released, I've got to ask, is that 4 million or is that more? The WWE are not losing money. They are just making less money than their initial projection suggested. This was not necessary. But if you look at it further afield and going forwards, if they continue to lose money on those projections, they might end up losing money. If they continue to not be able to broadcast pay-per-views with fans, they might lose that money. And if they get told within a couple of days, no, we've decided you're not essential, they might then start losing money. So it depends what comes next, but at this moment, none of these releases were necessary based on the money being made by the WWE.
If they aren't necessary, and if the WWE seems to feel like they're in a pretty good spot with the Florida government and being able to continue to produce shows, then what is the motivation for these matches? Is it just simply all these people were deemed expendable and maybe dead weight, and so they were just kind of looking for a way to release them without maybe hurting feelings, just on a personal basis? So this kind of window of opportunity presented itself, and so they took the chance to release these guys and girls and say, hey, well, it's because of the coronavirus. I mean, if it's not necessary, what's the motivating factor here?
It's hard to say. As I say, it may become necessary in the future, and I don't completely disagree when they talk about their angles. For example, moving their head office, that's something that isn't necessary, so they don't need to do that. They can save the money there. When it comes to, they're talking about the amount of people they have and potentially some of them being classified as dead weight. There was definitely discussions ongoing as to, is this person and what they do for us worth the money that they cost us? When you look at the talent that is being released, by and large it is talent that is not on TV often and may not be considered worth the money being spent, which is a real shame for that talent. And some of the people, No Way Jose is a perfect example. He's come up through NXT, he's been brought up to the main roster, he's signed a couple of contracts in his time with the company, so his income has gone up and up, but he's had no opportunity on the main roster. You look at Zack Ryder, you look at Mike Chioda, people have been there for an extremely long time. They've been signing new contracts and amassing more and more and more because their income will increase with every contract. If you're not on TV and you are costing that much, they have to look at you and think, right, we don't need this person, we can save this much money. But you're still talking about people's livelihoods here.
Yeah, I mean, a guy like Mike Chioda,
that balancing act is hard.
Yeah, and I understand that, but, to your point about some of the names on this list, Mike Chioda was one that stuck out to me. I mean, for one, he's a referee, so I can't imagine he'd be costing that much money to the WWE, but also, I mean, he'd been with the company since, I think, 1989, and, he's one of the guys on this list that is let go for cost-cutting reasons. That just, I mean, that blows my mind.
89, yeah. He's been with the company 31 years. And now he's been released. It is so difficult to really talk about this and try and be respectful of everyone involved, because there are logical reasons for WWE to do this. There are logical reasons that they shouldn't be doing this. But we don't know who's furloughed, who's not furloughed when it comes to the talent. When you look at the referee pool, it's been growing recently. So maybe that is someone they look at and think that isn't someone necessary to the operation of our company. But you lose that much experience and that much leadership. I really feel for him.
Now, here in the past couple years, really especially since the advent of AEW becoming a, legitimate company and gaining momentum, the WWE has been accused a lot of times of, quote, hoarding talent, of signing up everybody they can, with promises of stardom and huge money contracts, not necessarily because they saw them as potential headliners, but just to keep them away from AEW and the other competition. Is today an example of that kind of coming to roost, that there's only so much talent you can actually keep on your books before, there's got to be this big, bloodletting, for a lack of a better word, that you can only keep so many names on your talent roster at one time?
It could be. It's a bit overdue, a mass release. They always used to release a couple every year, and that kept things fresh. And because of the situation with no COVID at that time, when they released Luke Harper, Sin Cara, and it was Ascension, wasn't it? With them being released, everyone was happy that they were released because they could immediately go elsewhere. You look at Luke Harper doing what he's doing at AEW, look at Sin Cara in AAA. They're doing things. They were able to land on their feet pretty smoothly. But they have been capturing talent from all over, and they've just been making more brands and more brands. 205 Live, NXT UK, 5 separate brands, all doing separate things. It's hard to say that they needed all of that. And even within those brands, NXT has so many people just in developmental who haven't even been on TV, or people who've maybe only been on a couple of times, who have real potential, but they have absolutely no chance of showing it. I go back to No Way Jose, I go back to Drake Maverick, Mike Kanellis. So many people on this list were not given a chance. I rated Primo and Epico pretty highly, but they only seemed to get chances when it was a big tag team Survivor Series match. They could really wrestle. They could really show what they could do if they were given a chance to do it. But there is so much oversaturation of talent, and there was simply way too much. And in the last few years, they've not been releasing anyone, and it seems like they've been trying to keep them away from other companies, AW in particular. Luke Gallows, Carl Anderson are gone now. They certainly have a lot of options, and it took a lot of convincing to make them sign their new contract, which they signed very recently. Now that contract is null and void. So now, at this point, the WWE are fine letting them go wherever. You look at people like Rusev, who clearly didn't want to stay, and only now has he been actually released, when they literally have no other choice but to look for people to get rid of, essentially. The WWE were holding on to people, some of them who did not want to stay. So a little bit coming home to roost, yes.
Kind of to that same point, you mentioned Rusev, Mike Kanellis, being people that in the past had supposedly asked for their release and were not granted them at the time. Did any talent, to your knowledge, this go round kind of see the writing on the wall that this was coming and ask for their release again, or knew that there were releases coming and went to management and said, hey, if you got to release some people, I want to go, let me be one of the ones that you let go? Or this time around, was it a surprise to everyone involved and no one was really, asking for a release or let know ahead of time?
This batch of releases coming when they did was definitely a surprise. No one knew this was coming in advance. However, there are people who have previously asked to leave. Rusev's one of those, for example. You can tell by the tweet from Deonna Purrazzo. She was looking to do this for a while, yeah. And it's been true for a while. People have been emboldened by what happened with Luke Harper, with Sin Cara, with the Ascension. When they were released, people felt emboldened to ask for their release. You look at what's happened with the Revival. They've been pushing for their release for a while. They finally got it, but it took them to near the end of their contract. They've been clear the whole time they don't want to be there. So while I don't think it's many people on this list, Rusev definitely being one of them, there are definitely, what I believe there are a few people who won't be necessarily disappointed to get a release that they maybe were looking for. Mike Kanellis, Maria Kanellis maybe being some of those. I doubt EC3 was happy, but you'd have to ask him personally. So there are a few people who were definitely keen on the release and may have asked for their release. Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows, another one, we've mentioned them, that had to be convinced to sign their new contract. So it's certainly a possibility. I think a few people have asked in the past, and those are people that the WWE decided to talk to this time to see if they were still interested and to essentially say, okay, if you're still interested, now's the time, we're going to let it happen.
Now, at least for the past hour or so, everything seems to be a little bit quiet. Maybe things have settled down for today. I keep checking my Twitter timeline here on my phone to see if anything else is kind of broken as we're recording.
Yeah, I'm terrified to check. I'm genuinely terrified. There was a moment where I thought to myself, is it over? Is it calm? And then Rusev was gone. And I love Rusev.
Yeah, I know. When I saw that, when I even put it out on Twitter, I knew that one was gonna hit you hard. I wanted to check in on you and just make sure everything was okay.
Yeah, that was lovely, man. Thanks for checking in. I appreciate that. It did. It's not just that one particularly hit me hard. I'm a big Rusev fan, as you know, but it was building and building and building, and all the ones previously. So many talented people.
Is there a probability, or what is, I guess, the probability or possibility of maybe a round two, as early as tomorrow? Do we think that this is it? Like you said, you almost are scared to check your Twitter timelines and things right now and your notifications to see who may be next. Do we think that this is it? Is this maybe just it for today and we see, another list of names come out tomorrow? What's your sense right now about if this is the end of the talent releases, or if we'll see more in the coming days?
It's the end for right now, and it could be the end completely. But what's going to happen now, after they've done their initial batch of releases that they had planned ahead for and they knew they were going to do, they had the list well before they actually told people that releases were coming. Now they will sit down and they will do the math, and they will work out exactly how much that released based on this, based on this, based on this. And they will look at that and they will say to themselves, is that enough? They'll pass it to the decision makers. They'll pass it to Vince McMahon, because now there's no Wilson and Barrios. It's just Vince making these decisions. They'll pass it to him and say, is this enough money cut? He will then make a decision as to whether or not it is. If it isn't, more people are going to be released. Also, it's very possible that we are now going to start hearing about furloughs for wrestlers, particularly ones who are injured. There's a number of them that maybe they simply want to stop paying them for this period. We've heard about this before, when the WWE will extend someone's contract when they've been out with an injury. Happened to the Revival, happened to Luke Harper. We've heard about this before. Now, instead of doing that, they can furlough them. So I think we may see that as well.
Last thing I want to ask you about this situation, we've seen a lot of discussion, especially in the past couple hours with these cuts, about a talent union. And we've heard about unions in wrestling for years and years, all the way back to the 80s. We've heard stories of Jesse Ventura approaching Hulk Hogan about, creating the wrestlers union. But now today this discussion has come back up because of not only the mass releases, but again because of the situation that they're being done in when there is this, virus pandemic in the country. And a lot of people would say that this would be the time that if there was going to be a union formed, or maybe even a talent strike, to say, hey, this isn't right. We're putting our health on the line as it is. Simply to run shows and simply to be putting our product on television. And now, we're seeing our fellow co-workers and friends released and without anywhere else to go. Would this be the opportunity for the talent, the wrestlers, to come together and pull some type of talent strike or to form a union? And this would kind of be the groundswell that they would need to do that?
It sounds like a great idea, and I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in forming a wrestlers union, and it has to start from the bottom up. It's not going to start in the WWE because the WWE has the power to release people whenever they want. And they would. That's the situation here. If they start unionizing, it'll be isolated people, and it's very difficult. So with everyone having gone, I've got to say now is not the time to be starting a wrestlers union. But in the days to come, if you want the support of a union, if you as a wrestler want the support of a union, you got to stick your neck out a little bit. It's got to be companies that are pro-union, that have stated that they are pro-union. AEW has said that they are pro that. They are pro workers' rights. They are pro their workers being employees and having healthcare. That needs to be something that extends to a union. So companies need to start looking at this, because it will get to the point where the WWE really, really want to sign a huge name from a competitor, and then they're willing to sign someone who's unionized. Before you know it, it'll spread like wildfire. You've got to start somewhere. If they want to make it happen, they've got to start making it happen, but it won't be easy when they're kind of afraid to be potentially losing people. I do know that there has been a little bit of pressure on certain locker room leaders to look into this. I'm not going to name names. I think everyone knows who the locker room leaders are in the WWE, but there are talent who have been with the company for a while who are looking to those indispensable people who are not going to be fired under any circumstances, and they are saying to them, you need to help us. I know there is at least a small movement in wrestling to make this happen. Whether or not those locker room leaders will listen, we'll have to wait and see, but someone has got to be very brave if this is ever going to get off the ground.
To that point, and I'm going to make an assumption here that, at least for today, Vince McMahon is probably not the most popular person in the WWE locker room right now. Those locker room leaders that you spoke of, will they maybe find themselves in a situation where they're being torn between two places, where they've got their cohorts in the locker room saying, hey, we need to stand up for ourselves, this isn't right, we're putting our health on the line here, et cetera, and then maybe the Vince McMahons and the Triple H's and the management of the world telling those same leaders, hey, we need you to go in the locker room and smooth things over and make sure that there isn't an uprising or a movement like this. We need you to go in as ambassadors for us to kind of smooth things over, with the boys and kind of squash anything that, any tempers and any wild thoughts that may be forming right now. We're in a tough situation. This is a business. You've got to think in business terms, et cetera, et cetera. So could those locker room leaders kind of find themselves between a rock and a hard place here?
Very possible. You don't tend to get to the top without being a locker room leader, and part of being a locker room leader is listening to the management, because they will give you the chances and you'll rise to the top as long as you are doing both things. So there will definitely be some pressure on those locker room leaders, and I can't for even a moment say which way they should go. That's a personal decision for them, and obviously it depends on the personal choices that they want to make. If they don't personally want a union, they shouldn't be pushing for a union for the other talent. So it's really that simple. But you're going to get a few people who are being pushed and pulled from both sides at this point, and those people have just lost friends as well. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say all power to them with whatever they want to do, because everyone has lost people that they care about in a way that they are no longer with the company. And it's going to be different every time they come to a Raw or a SmackDown or an NXT and they don't see those people. So some people will probably choose to bunker in a bit, and honestly, that's okay.
One other topic I do want to touch on with you before we close out the show, Ronda Rousey also made the news cycle this week with some pretty disrespectful comments, I would say, about the WWE and its talents. Among other things, she used the dreaded F word, fake, when talking about wrestling and comparing it to MMA. The big question here, Tom, is this a shoot? Is this a work? Maybe a little bit of both? What can you tell us?
Well, when it comes to the wonderful world of work or shoot, Ronda Rousey is very good at the works. However, unfortunately, she does have history of not letting anyone know it's a work. So then it becomes a shoot and it starts to annoy people. You know, difficult again, because a lot of people do have history of Ronda Rousey. A lot of people respect Ronda Rousey, and a lot of people are pulled between 2 points. Nia Jax recently made some comments about someone who was working with Alexa Bliss and causing her injuries. She was very respectful when she said it. She didn't name any names, and she didn't say that Alexa Bliss was being injured by someone, but that she was simply getting injured in the matches. And if it was in fact Ronda Rousey, I've got to give Natalya a lot of credit as a big friend of Ronda Rousey for biting her tongue there, but that's part of that respect. Ronda Rousey was disrespectful, and she doesn't seem to have rowed back at all.
If this was a shoot, if this was, really how Rousey feels currently about the WWE, what was it that kind of brought this attitude change on? In the past, when we saw her in her run with the WWE, she seemed very respectful of the business in previous interviews. If you saw her on the Total Divas season that she was featured on, she seemed like she was very respectful backstage, seemed like she had a good relationship with the other women in the division. Obviously, she has a past relationship with Roddy Piper. What could be the driving force behind this seemingly sudden change of attitude for Ronda Rousey towards the wrestling business?
I would say it was pretty much the heel turn. When Becky got particularly popular, it really drove Ronda Rousey into that real heel dynamic, and she embraced it, and this is how she embraced it. She's been doing this for a little while before she even left. This was in an interview, so she was asked questions about this, and it could simply be she was staying in kayfabe. She was staying in character. Also, it could be the fact that she's drawn so much attention and really shown how much of a draw she can be, could be driving up the price of her return when she does eventually return. If she does eventually return.
If this is kayfabe and we look at it as it is, shooting an angle for her potential return, when do you think that could possibly be? If Rousey returns to the WWE, what do you think would be the opportune time to have that happen?
Well, she's been away from wrestling for a year, which always makes me very curious, because she apparently has a 3-year contract and hasn't wrestled a match in a year, or in fact being on WWE TV. So I've got to ask questions about that. I know that she was in the WWE HQ recently. She was on a picture with Cain Velasquez when that happened. And they do regular check-ins, negotiations about contract. Do you want to come back? She knows what she wants. The company know what they want. And I know that with the current pandemic and everything going on here, even if she was originally planned to be back at WrestleMania, she wouldn't want to come back right now, because now's just not an ideal time. If you follow her social media and you watch her on Twitch or her YouTube videos, she talks about it a lot. She talks about not being sure, but she talks about having a lot of fun. So the negotiations are still ongoing. If she is driving up her price, certainly she's doing a very good job of it. But the fact that she's being mentioned quite a lot on Raw, as she was last week when Shayna Baszler was making her appearance, that is something that makes you wonder, she must be coming back soon, otherwise why are they mentioning her at all?
So would it be fair to say that you're leaning towards the side of this is all just working an angle, and that this will eventually lead to her character's heel return to WWE?
I'm leaning in that direction, yes, as the intention. Unfortunately, I think she didn't deliver it as well as she should, and it did upset some people.
We'll wrap up the show tonight with a couple of fan questions, and as always, if you want to get involved with the show, you can tweet us your questions using the hashtag Dropkick DiSKussions, and hopefully you will get your question answered by Tom or I, and we've got a couple here tonight to wrap up the show. Both of these obviously having to do with the news of today and the releases from the WWE. So I'll ask you this first one from @WrestlingInVain. Who all do you think will be picked up by AEW and other companies? Now, before you answer, Tom, I know that, we've already talked about in the show that all these people that have been released, they are quarantined, they have a stay-at-home order. There's not anywhere for them to go right now, even if they wanted to. Plus, we don't know what the terms of their release are, if it's an immediate release, if it's, if they've got a 6-month no-compete clause, whatever the case may be. But when this all settles, who do you think will be at the top of the list of an AEW or other rivaling companies as far as talent that they would like to bring in and think would be a good fit for what they're doing in their respective company?
I'm not one to speculate much, but purely based on who I think would be a good fit where, I'd say EC3 will probably go back to Impact where he was a main event level star, and I think he really felt at home there. We look at Gallows and Anderson, same deal. New Japan, I think for them, they felt at home. They were top-level talents. They can add a lot to that roster. AEW, I think the numbers are a bit smaller. They're quite picky and they want this exact thing, and they have in their mind certain people that they do want. I think Rusev will definitely be one of those. I would like to see Rusev and Aiden English potentially reunite. And there's also a few. Rowan maybe could go to AEW to reunite with the former Luke Harper, now Brody Lee. Beyond that, I'm really not sure. Primo and Epico, I think, will leave America and wrestle somewhere else. Leo Rush, I think, is really going to work on his music career. He's released an album, and it seemed to be very well received. And Drake Maverick can pretty much go anywhere. He had a very good run at Impact, and like I say, I've been to lots of little arenas where he performed and really entertained everyone. I hope everyone finds somewhere relatively quickly, and I hope they're able to do everything they want to do very quickly. There are some very talented individuals, and I really hope the best for all of them.
Ray J's World asked, is there some way that we can support the people that were released?
Definitely, and it's going to be different for every individual. Certain people, I'd imagine PWTs are going to be jumping on this, slightly as a business opportunity, of course, but mostly for the support aspect, because from PWTs, you can buy a couple of t-shirts, they can design them themselves, and you're supporting them directly. Some people may have patrons. Keep an eye out on their Twitters for what's coming in future. Leo Rush, I mentioned, has an album. You can buy the album. That's a great way to do it. So keep an eye out on their individual Twitters. But at this point, I would avoid buying t-shirts from WWE because the money that they get from that, they don't get so much. And at this point, it's hard to say when they will get their checks from that anyway. So wait a little while, wait for information from their Twitters about t-shirts, PWTs, check on that. Leo Rush's album is an immediate way you can do it.
Yeah, and I will say I also saw a tweet from Dolph Ziggler earlier today that kind of mentioned the same thing that you're saying. It mentioned PWTs. I think it also gave a link for booking Cameo, which is a company that gets talent to do like personalized greetings and birthday messages and things. So, and you talked earlier about locker room leaders. I thought that was a great example from him of being one of those leaders, putting that out there and letting fans know of ways that they can support these talents that have been released. But if you're a fan of these guys and girls, ways that you can still go out and support them even though they're no longer with the WWE.
I've got to agree there. Dolph really showed leadership there, and also a special shout, I've mentioned him a couple of times already, Leo Rush, before he would have got the phone call, made a comment essentially saying we're still family, we're still going to support each other. Afterwards was the same again. And I think back to when Emma was released and he made himself very unpopular because of a comment, really shows how much he's matured in the last few years.
What a day it's been, and we appreciate you all tuning in to Dropkick DiSKussions to get all your latest updates and listening to the show. Please be sure to like and comment on this week's podcast video and also subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. While you're there, you can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well. I'm sure he'll be talking about this and many more wrestling news and notes this week. He'll have plenty of content to post up there this week for sure. You can also follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue. You can also follow me at Korey Gunz if you like. And you can check out Sportskeeda.com for all the latest and up-to-date wrestling news and feature articles. We thank you for joining us again this week, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Dropkick DiSKussions.